On a cold, grey morning in the winter of 1944, somewhere near the muddy front lines of Western Europe, a moment unfolded that almost sounds impossible. A moment so strange that even seasoned officers would later shake their heads at it. The Supreme Allied commander of the largest military force in history stood near the front, watching troops and vehicles move through smoke and frost. And standing not far away was one of the most famous generals in the United States Army. A man with a hard face, a sharp voice, and a reputation that filled newspapers. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. Yet for several long seconds, Dwight D. Eisenhower did not realize who he was looking at. Only when an aide quietly intervened did the truth land with weight. The man Eisenhower had just overlooked was George Smith Patton Jr. That single moment tells us more about war, pressure, and leadership than most battlefield maps ever could. To understand how something like this could happen, we have to step back into the world of World War II, into a time when exhaustion was constant, danger was normal, and even legends could blend into the chaos. By late 1944, the war in Europe had entered one of its most brutal phases. The Allied landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944, had succeeded, but victory was far from certain. After months of grinding combat across France, Belgium, and into Germany, the front lines had become a place of endless movement and confusion. Roads were packed with trucks, tanks, wounded men, and refugees. Commanders were stretched thin, moving constantly, sleeping little, and making decisions that affected millions of lives. Dwight D. Eisenhower was at the center of it all. As Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, he carried responsibility unlike any American officer before him. Every major decision in the European theatre eventually crossed his desk. He was not just managing generals. He was balancing British and American interests, calming political tensions, and responding to emergencies that changed by the hour. By December 1944, Eisenhower was under extreme strain. The German army had just launched a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest on December 16th, an offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Allied lines were bent, units were cut off, and for the first time since Normandy, there was real fear that the Germans might regain momentum. At the same time, George S. Patton was commanding the U.S. Third Army. Patton was already famous, even infamous. He had led armoured forces in North Africa in 1942, helped drive Axis troops out of Sicily in 1943, and played a key role in the breakout from Normandy in Operation Cobra during July 1944. His Third Army had swept across France at an incredible speed, covering hundreds of miles in weeks. Patton believed in aggressive movement, constant pressure, and offensive spirit. His men joked that if Patton ever stopped moving, the war might end out of boredom. Yet by late 1944, Patton was no longer the polished figure from newsreels. The man who once wore shiny helmets and carefully tailored uniforms had changed. Months near the front had stripped away some of the image. He spent long hours in the cold, often wearing simple field gear. He moved quickly, rarely announcing his presence. He wanted to see the front as it truly was, not as it appeared on maps or in reports. This habit brought him into close contact with danger, but it also meant that, at a glance, he could look like just another tired officer among thousands. The moment when Eisenhower did not recognize Patton did not happen in a quiet office or during a formal meeting. It happened close to the front, where chaos ruled. The exact date is generally placed in late December 1944, during the critical days of the Battle of the Bulge. Eisenhower was travelling forward to get a direct sense of conditions. He believed strongly in seeing situations firsthand. Despite his rank, he often visited command posts and forward areas, accompanied by aides and security officers. These trips were risky, but Eisenhower felt they were necessary to make informed decisions. On this particular visit, Eisenhower arrived at a location where several senior officers were present. Vehicles were parked haphazardly. Soldiers moved through mud and snow. Artillery fire could be heard in the distance. Reports were coming in constantly. Eisenhower's attention was divided, his mind likely racing through troop movements, supply shortages, and German breakthroughs. In such an environment, faces blurred together, uniforms were dirty, ranks were less visible, formalities were often skipped. Patton was there as well, having arrived earlier to assess the situation of units involved in the counter-offensive that would soon relieve Bastogne. He was focused on his own task, speaking with officers, looking at maps, and asking sharp questions. He did not announce himself. That was not his style. He believed that respect came from results, not from demanding attention. When Eisenhower entered the area, he acknowledged several officers but passed by Patton without reaction. To Eisenhower, this was just another general among many. The idea that he could miss Patton seems strange today, given Patton's fame. But at that moment, Patton was not wearing his trademark polished helmet or ivory-handled pistols. He was bundled against the cold, dressed much like the others, his face drawn from fatigue. An aide, likely one of Eisenhower's staff officers who knew Patton well, noticed the oversight. In a quiet but urgent way, he pointed out that the officer Eisenhower had just ignored was General Patton. The realization reportedly surprised Eisenhower. He had spent years working with Patton, knew his voice, his mannerisms, and his reputation. Yet in that moment, under pressure and distraction, even Eisenhower's sharp awareness had failed. This was not a sign of disrespect or ignorance. It was a reflection of the conditions under which these men were operating. The war had reduced everyone to essentials. Personalities mattered less than positions and actions. Even the most famous generals were subject to the same exhaustion and anonymity as the men they commanded. To fully appreciate this moment, it helps to understand the relationship between Eisenhower and Patton. Their connection went back many years. They first met during the interwar period, when both were junior officers interested in armoured warfare. In the 1920s and 1930s, tanks were not taken seriously by much of the US Army. Patton and Eisenhower were among the few who saw their potential. They studied European developments, wrote papers, and discussed future wars long before the rest of the Army caught up. Despite this shared background, the two men were very different. Eisenhower was calm, diplomatic, and patient. He believed in coalition warfare and compromise. Patton was fiery, blunt, and driven by instinct. He believed in speed, shock, and relentless attack. Eisenhower often had to manage Patton, keeping his aggressive tendencies in check. Patton, for his part, respected Eisenhower's authority, but sometimes felt constrained by it. Their relationship became strained during the Sicily campaign in 1943, when Patton slapped two soldiers suffering from what we now recognize as combat stress. The incidents caused public outrage when they became known in the United States. Eisenhower was forced to reprimand Patton and temporarily remove him from command. It was one of the most difficult decisions Eisenhower ever made. He knew Patton was a brilliant battlefield commander, but discipline and morale mattered. Patton eventually returned to command, playing a key role in deceiving the Germans before D-Day through the fictional 1st US Army Group. The Germans believed Patton would lead the main invasion, which helped draw attention away from Normandy. After the landings, Patton's Third Army became one of the most effective Allied forces in Europe. By December 1944, Eisenhower needed Patton more than ever. When the German offensive threatened to split Allied lines, it was Patton who famously pivoted his entire army north in a matter of days. On December 18, 1944, at a meeting in Verdun, Patton stunned Allied leaders by stating that his army could attack north within 48 hours. Many thought this was impossible. Yet Patton delivered. By December 26, elements of the Third Army reached Bastogne, relieving the surrounded 101st Airborne Division. It is likely that the moment of non-recognition occurred around this period of intense movement and decision-making. Eisenhower was under immense pressure. Patton was operating at maximum speed. Both men were focused on the larger picture, not on appearances. The significance of this moment lies not in embarrassment, but in what it reveals about leadership in war. War strips away identity. It reduces people to roles and actions. Even legends become part of the machinery. Eisenhower did not fail by not recognizing Patton. He demonstrated that no one was above the mission, not even the most famous general in the American Army. For Patton, the incident fit his own philosophy. He did not seek recognition from Eisenhower in that moment. He was concerned with moving tanks, securing roads, and defeating the enemy. Patton often said that a general should be judged by results, not by ceremony. In a strange way, being overlooked suited him. It meant he was close enough to the front to blend in. This moment also highlights how close Eisenhower came to the realities faced by frontline commanders. He was not a distant figure sitting safely in headquarters. He travelled, observed, and put himself in harm's way. This earned him respect among his subordinates, even when they disagreed with his decisions. As the war continued into 1945, both men would play their final roles in the defeat of Nazi Germany. Patton's Third Army would drive deep into Germany, crossing the Rhine River in March 1945 and liberating large areas of Bavaria and western Czechoslovakia. Eisenhower would coordinate the final Allied push, balancing the ambitions of commanders like Patton, Montgomery, and Bradley. After the war, Patton's outspoken nature would once again bring controversy. He would die in December 1945 after a car accident in Germany, only months after the war ended. Eisenhower would return to the United States, eventually becoming the 34th president in 1953. Looking back, the moment when Eisenhower did not recognize Patton stands as a small but powerful symbol. It reminds us that history is not made only in grand speeches or famous photographs. It is made in muddy fields, crowded roads, and fleeting encounters. It is made by tired men making hard decisions under pressure. In that cold European winter, with artillery rumbling and the fate of nations at stake, two of America's greatest military leaders briefly crossed paths without ceremony. One did not recognize the other. And yet, together, through their combined efforts, they helped bring an end to the most destructive war the world had ever seen. The story endures not because it is shocking, but because it is human. It shows that even at the highest levels of command, war remains unpredictable. It humbles legends and reminds us that victory often depends on teamwork more than individual fame. And in that sense, the moment when Eisenhower did not recognize Patton tells us exactly why the Allies ultimately won. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.